Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable with our partner, Hines VA. Today is Saturday, April 22nd, 2023. April is Sexual Assault, Minority Health, and Autism Awareness Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host, Army National Guard veteran. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scott Turner Productions. And of course, we have Shakaya Flynn in as our executive producer and also as our studio engineer today. She's doing a great job as always. And we have a great panelist with us today. That's Dr. Solani Pereira. She is the Hines VA Military Sexual Trauma Coordinator in the Trauma Services Program and a licensed psychologist specializing in the treatment of PTSD and other trauma-related concerns. And we're going to talk about MST, military sexual trauma, and some of the things that go around that and the complications of that, particularly with veterans today. How are we doing today?
Good, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Are you great? So. Great. We've talked about military sexual trauma a few times on our show. And the thing that I wanted to kind of go into and ask you particularly about military sexual trauma is what's the difference between MST versus sexual assault or sexual harassment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Military sexual trauma is the VA term for sexual assault and sexual harassment. So the definition of military sexual trauma, or MST for short, is sexual harassment or sexual assault that occurred during someone's military service. So objectively speaking, it is the same as sexual harassment and sexual assault. But when it happens during your military service, the terminology is used as military sexual trauma.
And I guess this is very impactful for survivors. Can you give us an idea of the spectrum of how that might manifest? Because there's a lot of, even though nowadays in modern societies, particularly if you work in a corporate world, we get sexual harassment training at work, in the workplace. We're doing, video modules on what's appropriate and inappropriate in the workplace. What are some of the ranges of how it might manifest in the military? But we're talking about military sexual trauma.
Yeah, I think it ranges, there's a very broad range, right? In my time working with veterans, I have heard numerous different ways this shows up, right? So we all recognize when we hear sexual assault, right? It could be, sexual assault by a fellow soldier. It could be a sexual assault by a superior, or sexual assault by a non-military personnel while you are in service. And all of that would be military sexual trauma. But it's more than the traditional way we think about sexual assault, right? So I have heard examples from veterans where they talk about the pressure, the coercion that they experience to go on a date, or be flirtatious when they didn't want to be, and they knew the consequences because of the hierarchy of military service built into the military service, what that would mean for them if they didn't do what was asked of them by a superior, and this pressure they might feel to unable to say no, right? So sexual harassment could look like, language, right? Repeated exposure to language sexualized language that is unwanted. It doesn't even have to be repeated. It could be one time unwanted sexualized language. It could be invitations to engage in various types of, whether it's sexual activity, go on a date, engage in any way that's unwanted. It can be, farther than that, right? It could be unwanted touch, unwanted contact of any kind. So it's language, it's contact, it's coercion. The key here is consent, right? That if it's sexual harassment, it's sexual assault, it lacks consent. It's unwanted language. It's unwanted contact.
So when a person experiences these types of things, well, first off, one of the things that makes it way more difficult, as you mentioned, touched to when you're in the military versus a civilian job. You can quit a civilian job or maybe file a complaint with HR, and in the military, you don't really have those options oftentimes, especially if you're technically your HR will be the equivalent, the military equivalent of HR is your superior officer who might be the one doing the abuse. So how does this affect people and survivors? So when people are going through these types of issues, what are the long-standing effects psychologically and emotionally on a person?
Yeah, I think the impact of sexual assault is very broad, much bigger than mental health alone. We talk a lot about the mental health impact of sexual assault and sexual harassment because it's huge, right? The impact is huge. But I think it is helpful to think about it as much more broader than that. There are medical impacts, right? Physical injuries one could sustain during an assault, whether it's that could be long-term or in the short run. There are more chronic pain issues, sexual dysfunction. There are many medical consequences that someone could sustain because of military sexual trauma. And the mental health impact could exacerbate medical concerns too, right? So if somebody is suffering from mental health issues, and I'll talk about those in a second, and they're not able to attend to their medical needs, if they're not able to follow up with gynecological services, if they're not able to take care of their diabetes, if they're not able to attend to their physical health because of their mental health concerns, that could exacerbate medical concerns. So military sexual trauma can have a large impact on someone's medical health in addition to their mental health. And the mental health impact is very broad-ranging, right? So we know that people who experience trauma could have PTSD and other mental health concerns. But beyond the trauma and PTSD and trauma-related concerns, they could have substance use concerns, they could have depression, they could be struggling with enormous amount of shame and guilt and mistrust and kind of feeling really dislocated and isolated in their world, right? And that could exacerbate other mental health concerns, even pre-existing mental health concerns. So there is a very significant mental health burden that comes with that can come with military sexual trauma. There's also psychosocial impacts, right? So I very routinely very commonly hear from veterans, I left the military much sooner than I have wanted to. My military career ended because of the sexual trauma.
Wow.
And that has consequences, right? Financial consequences. Some veterans were planning to have a military career. Their career was cut short, right? That can have a very lifelong impact on someone's professional outlook, someone's financial security. Many veterans spend years and years not being eligible for VA services, or they think they're not eligible for VA services because they were discharged in a way that didn't, different than honorable discharges. Well, I definitely want to take a minute at some point today to talk about the fact that military sexual trauma, military sexual trauma-related services, veterans are eligible for regardless in many conditions, even if they're not eligible for services in the VA. But sometimes I meet veterans who spent 30 years not knowing that and haven't gotten the health care they need, right? So the psychosocial impact of military sexual trauma can also be pretty, it's huge. So, the long-term and short-term medical, mental health, psychosocial impact of MST is very, very significant.
So what does the VA have as far as services and treatments for people that suffer MST?
Yeah, so VA nationally have many, every VA has a military sexual trauma coordinator. And at Hines, that's me, at Hines Embassy Box. And the role of the military sexual trauma coordinator is to ensure that veterans who have reported it, who have experienced MST, are getting the services they need. and that we're troubleshooting if there's eligibility issues. We are making sure those services are available, that we have groups and treatments up and running. I also, part of my job is also to make sure that clinicians working with veterans are knowledgeable about MST and that they have access to information that they need to be able to provide quality care for survivors of MST. So nationally, VA is committed to treating, serving, caring for veterans who have experienced MST. An integral part of that is this MST role. Beyond that, at Hines in particular, because MST impact is so diverse, we try to offer treatment and care within the existing clinics because it feels very limiting to think of MST like, okay, if you have MST, you go to an MST clinic. Well, there are many, many, many different impacts of MST. So the way we think about MST care at Hines is much more comprehensively. What are the medical needs you have related to MST? How can we work with primary care and other specialty clinics to ensure you receive that care? The women's clinic, all of the medical clinics that we have. What are the mental health consequences that you're struggling with? How can we utilize the trauma services program, the general mental health clinic, and the integrated behavioral health care units, the eating disorder department, all these various departments, the mental health departments in the VA to provide you with care. So, one of the primary things we do is trying to make sure that we utilize the services throughout the hospital to ensure that we address the very diverse range of impacts our veterans might be struggling with related to MST. We do also have two MST-specific groups. So we have the women's MST group at Hines. We also have a men's MST group through the clinical resource hub available to veterans. So those groups specifically give veterans an opportunity to be among other veterans with similar experiences and receive the support and skills and opportunity and a safe place really to process their experiences that's MST specific. So those two groups, you can, if we have veterans interested and you're already connected to mental health care at the VA, any of your VA clinicians can refer you to those groups, and they're routinely offered information about how to do that, or you can reach out to me. And like I said, it's about thinking about all of the different ways that a survivor might be struggling and utilizing the different services we have at Hines. We also have veteran service officers on campus and throughout that can assist with filing a service connection claim, and that involves MST-related claims, right? So if a veteran has experienced MST and it has had an outsized impact on their life, their ability to be gainfully employed, their ability to support themselves, another way in which the VA support veterans is by ensuring that they're able to file the claims that they need to and kind of guide them through. So sometimes, veteran might have figured out a way to manage or get the care they need for medical and mental health needs, but maybe what they need help from us is to figure out the psychosocial element of that, right? So then we might connect them with the veteran service officers who can help them start a claim and file a claim if appropriate.
How does a person, how do you reach those people you mentioned earlier that were veterans who maybe had a less than honorable discharge? How do you get the message out to those people? Because you kind of touched on that, but then also oftentimes people who maybe are eligible to use a VA system or had an honorable discharge, they might sometimes are self-medicating or using drugs in order to try to cope. How do you get someone to recognize that maybe back in their mind they're really trying to cover for or cope with an MST's incident that they maybe haven't really fully acknowledged?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer those two questions separately. So for veterans who are interested in getting services, and they are not qualifying for VA services for typically, under the typical kind of guidelines. So the enrollment status. Military sexual trauma is a special eligibility criteria. So if the veteran has experienced MST, in most cases, you qualify for free MST-related services, even if you don't qualify for services in general. There is a small group of veterans who might not automatically qualify for MST-related services. In that situation, eligibility department and I work to figure out there's a process that we can go through to help those veterans explore the possibility of them qualifying for MST-related services. So my invitation to veterans who are wondering, can I qualify for MST-related services? Because I know I won't qualify for other services, is please either contact me or contact Hines Eligibility, and either case we can kind of get you the information you need. And like I said, more often than not, veterans qualify for MST-only services, even if they don't qualify for regular services. And if you are in the small group of veterans where we might need to take a few extra steps, we will help you do that. I can help you do that, and so is Hines Eligibility. If you call Hines Eligibility or walk into Hines Eligibility and you let them know, all you would have to say is that you are wanting to be considered for MST eligibility. That's it. They know what to do next. You don't have to share any information. I know that sometimes it can feel very daunting, right, to walk in and tell someone I have experienced MST. So it is a lot that we ask you when I tell you walk in and tell us. I recognize what that means, and I'm hopeful that the veterans can hear me say, we take this seriously. It's confidential. You don't have to tell eligibility anything more than just mention MST. That word will then allow us to start the process. You can contact me. I'm a clinician, right? I'm bound by all of the confidentiality rules that we honor, and I care deeply about making sure our veterans who are eligible for MST services, who need MST services, get MST services. So, we will do our utmost to protect your confidentiality and guide you through this process. That, to me, that is why April Sexual Assault Awareness Month and all this, added awareness raising projects we do on top of the regular stuff we do is important, because I'm really hopeful that we can reach the veterans who want to come in but don't think that they can take that next step for whatever reason, whether it's mental health reasons or eligibility concerns, whatever it is, right? For veterans who are struggling, who might be, self-medicating, as you said, the impact of MST is so long-lasting, and one of the most common things we hear is that people are really struggling in silence because of shame. Because of inability to believe that anybody would help them anyway, right?
We got to cut you off right there because we're running out of time. Can you give us your contact information before? We got to have you back to kind of go more into this, because that's one thing I really want to get into is the emotional impacts and how we're actually having a success in trying to treat and help people with MST overcome that burden, that heavy weight. How do people get in contact with your services?
Sure. So you can call me directly. It's a direct VA number. It's 708-202-5067. Or you can just call Hines and ask for the military sexual trauma coordinators. The Hines VA front desk staff are trained to connect you to me.
Dr. Solani Pereira, thank you for your time. I appreciate everything you've done so far. You're doing a great job, and also want to have more conversations with you about this.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for having me here.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.